Hi, my name is Francisca, and for this presentation I'll be talking about disciplinary literacy and history in the history classroom. So to start out my presentation, I wanted to share this quote with everyone. It says, "Your history has led you to this moment, and you can only begin to change yourself by looking at what you are doing in the name of your history, in the name of your gods, in the name of your language." This is a quote by James Baldwin, and I think it really captures a lot of what many articles that I read in regards to the discipline of history said. And that's that history is not something that should be framed as a thing of the past, but rather something that continues to evolve, that students are in the process of creating themselves as they interact in the classroom and as they make decisions in their everyday lives. And I should actually preface my presentation by saying that I am studying to be an ESL teacher, but since ESL spans across the disciplines, I just chose to focus in on history for the purpose of this presentation. So how do historians create history? So one of the ways that historians create is by transcribing primary sources. And this could be transcribing sources that are written on paper and are just very fragile and need to be kept in specific enclosures for preservation, or they could be audio that needs to be transcribed, such as speeches. And this transcription process makes these documents, these sources, available for many, many more people across the world to see. And one place that I thought was really cool was the Smithsonian Digital Volunteer Transcription Center, where students can go in and volunteer to transcribe sources. So that's a really hands-on activity that students can engage with if they can go to the Smithsonian, of course. And then curation of sources for historical events. So historians can do this, or students in your classroom who are putting on their hats as historians in the classroom can also do this. This is a great activity for students that can be passed on to future classes. Students can learn about what a reliable source is and how to search for those. Future students can critique the validity of those sources. Were those sources still available when you went to go look them up online? Did that source actually turn out to be a reliable source, or was it a blog post or something like that? And then critiquing and creating historical arguments. So history isn't just about writing about what happened, reporting on what happened 100 years ago. Rather, it's about interpreting it and creating arguments about why that happened, or how those events affected future events. So this is another way that historians create history, and that students should also be engaged with creating in the classroom. Communicating. So historians are constantly in collaboration with one another, and this can only happen in a group setting, and that's in contrast to what we typically think of when we think of the history class, where we're sitting by ourselves doing rote memorization of dates and people and wars. So this is a lot more interactive, a lot more dynamic. So we're talking about cause and effect in the history classroom, change in continuity, turning points throughout history, using the past to interpret the present, and then understanding and asking questions about what the people of that time period valued and how those values affected their decisions. So these are all things that need to be discussed in history class and that students can take part in as they work collaboratively. Sharing knowledge. So using digital spaces is one of the prime ways that the literature emphasized to share knowledge, to share historical knowledge. So this is a way of defying the limits of space and time that we were previously constrained to before the internet. So we're not limited to the libraries and the museums anymore. We have things like wiki spaces, we have things like Google Docs that can be used to collaborate within a classroom or internationally with other students across the world. Historical knowledge can also be shared across the disciplines, in literature books in English class, in art pieces in art class. And then moving into terminology. So some of the terminology that is important for students to know and understand in order to interact in the history class One of them is primary source. So this is an artifact or document, a diary, manuscript, any source of information that was created during the time that's being studied. So for an example here, I have a picture of a letter that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote during his time in Birmingham jail. Secondary source. So these are things that describe, discuss, interpret, comment on, summarize, and they process primary sources within the secondary sources are influenced by primary sources. So these can be newspapers, magazines, books, book reviews, movie reviews. As an example here, I have a newspaper article from the civil rights movement during the sit-ins in Virginia. So that's an example of a secondary source. And then tertiary source. This is the most common one that we get, that we have available to us in our classrooms. So this is information that has been compiled from primary and secondary sources. One of the biggest examples being the textbook. And while textbooks are great, and you can gather a lot of information from them, how exciting would it be for students to actually get their hands on those primary and secondary sources and to interact with them and see what sources were excluded from their textbooks. Why were they excluded? What sources could have really enriched their learning within their textbook that weren't included? So these are really great. So while tertiary sources are really great as kind of overviews of the big picture, getting that interaction with the primary and secondary sources is another really excellent learning and comprehension activity. Terminology in terms of some of the things that we hear very commonly today in the news. So a bill. A bill is a draft of a law presented to the legislature for enactment. And I've included a link here to the music video of How a Bill Becomes a Law from Schoolhouse Rock, which I think is a really great summary and really funny to watch. Legislature. So the legislature is an organized body having the authority to make laws for a political unit in either the nation or the state. So nationally we have the U.S. Congress, so the House of Representatives and the Senate. I think a lot of people, even adults, aren't informed about what these words mean or can be confusing them with other things. So it's really good to have just an understanding of these basic terms. And then an executive order. This is one that we've heard a lot about in the news, and I don't know that a lot of us really know what an executive order means. So an executive order is a directive action from a prime minister or president, in our case a president, to its executive governmental agencies in an official document. So there's been a lot of executive orders passed recently, and here's a picture of our current president signing off on one. And then those orders go down to the legislative branches to carry them out. This is very different from the passing of a bill, from a bill becoming a law. So understanding the differences, especially at this moment in history, and also in others, is very important to understand how things played out and how things will continue to play out. And then finally moving into the class activities. So first of all, we have quick writes, and I think these are great for ESL students. They're brief writing exercises. They can be 2 or 3 minutes long. They can be done at the beginning of class as an entry slip or at the end of class as an exit slip or somewhere in the middle. They can be guided by questions or they can be free writes, and they're popularly used as a diagnostic tool. So one of the ways that ESL students can really benefit from quick writes as a scaffold is by breaking up text and having students respond to that text with what they understand from it, what their questions are, reflecting on what they read, and just responding in general. And then I, as a teacher, can take those quick writes back, read them, and address any confusion that's going on, clarify any vocabulary. With ESL students who are not yet comfortable speaking or using their verbal language skills, this would be a great way to give students some privacy in addressing their concerns, and for me to be able to anonymously address those in front of the whole class, because probably more than one student is having them. So this is a great scaffold for understanding where students are at and helping them develop, helping them build off of that. And then the second class activity, reciprocal teaching. So this is a partner activity, and basically the text that students will be reading in a class is broken up into different sections, and before the students receive it, I as a teacher can go in and make notes in the margins, ask questions, clarify vocabulary words that might be complicated, and then students take that annotated text and summarize it, ask questions, clarify points with each other, and then predict what will happen next. So this could be really great for analyzing something like a speech during the Civil Rights Movement, for example, having the partners go through it and summarize what they understand, ask questions about it, and then predict what the next event, how policy was enacted, what was the response to this historical event, and see if they were, if they got it right or if they got it wrong, and then see why those things happened. Why didn't they happen the way that they thought they were going to happen? Were the values at the time different than what they are now? So that's all I have for this presentation. I hope that you were able to take something valuable away from it, and I look forward to watching your other presentations as well. Thanks.